Hello and welcome to the new episode of Access Up Space Defense and Security podcast. So today we'll be deep diving into the arms market, but not from a global perspective, of course, so much, but we'll be looking at the kind of lessons, the transformation that has happened through the Russia-Ukraine war. And we have a returning guest today. Her podcast was very well appreciated. I would like to mention that that was her first ever podcast that she recorded, and it was running so good because I believe there was no expert. I still believe that there are so very few experts who actually work on the Ukraine's arms market or related to how that ecosystem is transforming the other parts of the world. And Olena is one of those experts whom I found by luck, I would say, while I was reading through her articles, her research, while she was doing the research back then. Now her journey has evolved as well. So I would like to welcome back again on this podcast. Welcome back, Olena. Great to have you.
Thank you so much, Omkar. Very excited to be with you again, and very
Yeah,
excited to record the spontaneous interview just one day before the New
yeah,
Year Eve, right? So one of the last days of
yeah.
2025.
Absolutely, it's a great to have you back. I'd like to mention this fact that uh, your podcast was we received actually a request from some of the government institutions because of your podcast for our consulting service. Basically, I mean, of course, we are not experts on the Ukraine side, but we do arms and ammunition related consulting. And because of your podcast, I mean, I would like to mention to the audience that the content was so good of the previous podcast that we actually received kind of a business request because of her content. So I would like to thank you for that as well, Olina. Yeah. So yeah, before we jump into the topic, I think Olena's journey has spanned a lot since past 2 years. She has worked across different things, and I think she has evolved quite a lot since then. So I'd like to hand over the mic to Olena, and just if it would be great if you can just Olena give us a brief introduction again, because our audience of the podcast as well has gone above and beyond. Basically, it's 140 plus episodes now. I think back when we recorded it was under 100 episodes, so the audience is huge. Would be great if you can provide a brief introduction again.
Sure. So my name is Olena Kryzhanivska, and I'm Ukrainian defense analyst. Currently, I'm based in Canada, Toronto, Canada. So for over a year, I've been senior editor at the NATO Association of Canada, and also recently I started my new position as a postdoctoral fellow in defense innovations at Canadian Global Affairs Institute, and also as my separate project, as my independent project, I'm authoring weekly newsletter, Ukraine's Arms Monitor, that you can find on LinkedIn and also on Substack.
Absolutely. I think I'll be adding the link of your newsletter uh, under the description section of this episode so that people who'd like to basically read Olena's work, the kind of updates she provides, she provides some really interesting updates on a weekly basis as well. So you can subscribe to her, get in touch with her directly to basically see and engage in kind of any kind of assignment with her as well. So moving ahead into the actual episode. So our today's episode is the transformation of modern warfare in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war. So, to begin with, Olena, looking specifically at 2025, what emerging trends in warfare become impossible to ignore, and which of them do you believe will fundamentally reshape how wars are fought in the coming decade?
Yeah, well, 2025 was a very, very difficult year for Ukraine, but also very successful in terms of many successful operations that all of us noticed, and they were reported around the globe. I'm actually writing an article that will be released tomorrow, December 31st, about the trends in unmanned warfare. So drones, robotic systems, we see their increasing use in different modifications across different domains. So in 2025, we saw already not just the rise of separate systems like FPV drones or ground drones, but also their use in multi-domain operations. involving ground drones, but also aerial drones, and they are used in complex, in symbiosis, in assault operations, in medical evacuation. Also, when we are talking about some of the most successful operations that Ukraine conducted in 2025, of course, it's impossible not to mention Operation Spiderweb, which was conducted on June 1st, 2025, one of the probably the most famous operations by Ukraine, the well-known, and the one that will definitely go down in history by the level of execution. So it took 1.5 years to prepare it, a lot of personnel, a lot of special design, special tailored systems, and a lot of ingenuity from Ukrainian officers, from Ukrainian military personnel, but also those who were planning this entire operation. But this is just one example of that asymmetric warfare that Ukraine has applied in 2025. We already know that smaller countries or even non-state actors can use weapon systems, unmanned systems, and reach some of their goals. But in 2025, Ukraine just took it to a totally different level. And Operation Spiderweb was one of the examples of small country like Ukraine with small FPV drones destroying or damaging around 40 strategic aircraft in the Russian Federation that were located, stationed somewhere deep in the rear, and actually capable of carrying nuclear missiles. So Ukraine deeply affected Russia's nuclear capability. But also, in addition to that, there were a series of other episodes, cases where Ukraine demonstrated how asymmetric warfare can be applied in situations where the country doesn't have the same level of military capabilities, financial resources, and human resources as its enemy. We saw the recent case of the attack by Ukrainian sea drones on Russian submarine, which was the first case in naval history when these small unmanned, much cheaper systems destroyed a very expensive traditional capability of the Russian Federation. And we saw several of those cases already in 2025. We expect that we will see many more in 2026. But all of this proves how Ukraine is totally reinventing the way how modern war is being fought. But also, in addition to that, in my article, I will be talking about that you can definitely read. It will be free for everybody. I am going through all the unmanned systems that Ukraine and also Russia invested in 2025, such as fiber optic systems, but also interceptor drones. For example, one of the other trends of the year was a growing role of unmanned systems in substituting some of the traditional military capabilities. For example, obviously Ukraine doesn't have a sufficient number of artillery systems and of artillery ammunition. FPV drones that all of us heard about were specifically emerged as a whole category of systems on the battlefield in Ukraine to somehow compensate for that lack of traditional systems. Ukraine also doesn't have actually navy, right? Some of its navy was captured by Russia in 2014 or disabled by different attacks. So Ukraine doesn't have its own navy, but with the whole fleet of unmanned surface vehicles and also underwater vehicles, the general name of them are maritime drones. So with a whole fleet of those systems, which are also much cheaper, Ukraine was able to achieve very significant results. And also in the area of air defense. Unfortunately, 2025, Ukraine had a lack of air defense systems and missiles. Russia increased its attacks against Ukrainian civilian targets and civilian infrastructure. And the largest salvo of drones and missiles that Russia used against Ukraine was 815, I believe, so over 800. It is a huge number of systems deployed against Ukraine in a single night. And as a response to that development, Ukraine started developing its fleet of drone interceptors. It's a separate category of drones. There are also FPV drones, kamikaze, that are flying at very high speeds and destroying or disabling those Shahed type drones that Russia uses against Ukraine. So we saw that even in the area of air defense, Ukraine was trying to compensate for the lack of traditional systems. And it's one of those trends of 2025. And I would say that the last one that I would name is probably the rise of autonomous systems and of different experiments with AI-enabled technologies. We already know that Ukraine is using some AI elements for target recognition, for navigation, optical navigation of drones. But also Ukraine started experimenting significantly with swarming technologies. That's a very advanced technology when unmanned systems, drones, can communicate between each other, can recognize when something happened to one of them, can regroup, can coordinate between each other without involvement of human. So Ukraine has been testing this and experimenting significantly in 2025. And we also can expect that next year we will see large developments in that field.
That's, I would say, quite a huge and a wide range of developments. I was particularly interested in the multi-domain warfare, but I believe our subject is not concentrated to multi-domain warfare. Maybe after the podcast, I can ask you those questions. But definitely, I think multi-domain warfare is something. The point that you mentioned, it got highlighted for me because we actually work in those domain as Accessor as a company, especially a defense unit, and it's a very interesting area because I believe Ukraine is kind of engaging on a multi-domain level right now. I think even the air domain, land, even cyber and space is also there. I think all these domains are together at play, and it would be, I would say, basically good to create a different podcast episode for this. But I'll leave it the discussion open for the audience for sure. Maybe in the next few months we can definitely come back and record a one more episode on the same topic. Moving ahead, from your perspective, how has the balance between high-end military platforms and I would say low-cost mass-produced weapons shifted during the war? And what does that tell us about the future of force design?
Um, yeah, as I mentioned, just very briefly, maybe about the multi-domain warfare. Some of the cases that we saw in Ukraine, they are definitely very advanced, but I'm convinced that we don't know many things that are happening just behind the curtains because not everything can be disclosed, not everything can be reported. But what we see, how Ukraine is integrating its most advanced systems, such as naval drones, with small, cheap FPV drones, right? So some of the Sea Baby surface vehicles, they can be drone carriers for the fleet of those small, cheap FPVs, right? Extending their range and just reaching those areas where a usual FPV drone wouldn't reach without a carrier. The same is happening with ground drones when they're working together with aerial drones, with reconnaissance drones, for example, and conducting strikes, and are being increasingly used in unmanned operations, assault operations. We are not talking only about medical evacuation, but also assault when the drones are capturing some positions and even forcing the Russian soldiers to surrender. All of this is now happening with the use of unmanned systems that are coordinating between aerial systems and ground systems. So all of that is happening right now on the battlefield, and it's something. It seems, from a sci-fi movie where there are only robots on the battlefield. It's not entirely the reality. It's not entirely true yet, but everything moves to that direction, where soldiers will be removed as much as possible, as far as possible from the front lines, and all their tasks will be just conducted by unmanned systems. Returning to your questions about low cost, mass produced weapons and traditional military platforms. Again, turning to my first point, the traditional capabilities are still very much relevant. So they are very needed by both Ukraine and Russia. Obviously, Russia has larger military capabilities. It started preparing for this war already a decade ago, so it amassed a lot of traditional capabilities: tanks, armored vehicles, fighter jets, a fleet also, so all different possible capabilities, ammunition. And Ukraine, unfortunately, in a more disadvantageous position in this sense. So it definitely needs to search for something else. As I mentioned, right, there is no air defense systems, there is no air defense missiles. Ukraine invents drone interceptors. And Ukraine shows the way to other countries that it's not necessary to invest a huge amount of money to those traditional capabilities, like $1 million or several $1 million air defense missile, right? Those that are used by patriots, for example. Everything, or okay, not everything, but a lot of tasks can be done by smaller interceptor drones. And that's something that we saw in a case of Europe and, for example, Poland, that were unfortunately also attacked by some of mysterious drones. They were actually Russian drones, but there are different discussions about that. So in 2025, we saw that Russia went ahead and sent several dozens of its drones to just check the environment in Europe. And Europe wasn't ready to respond in a proper way because they have only traditional capabilities. They didn't have interceptors. They had to scramble their fighter jets. And that is something totally not cost efficient against Russian cheap drones. So the economy of war is changing. And for traditional capabilities, you need to find a cheaper defense, a cheaper countermeasure. And that is something that Ukraine is leading in. The same as FPV drones, right? They are much cheaper than the traditional artillery ammunition. And we see that some countries, for example, the United States, already integrate into their military doctrines the focus on fleet of FPV drones, something that probably became possible only after, in the course of this war, because of their effective use on a battlefield. Different countries also started taking notes and just changing their approaches and their military doctrines. So I would say that it's important to keep the balance and have traditional capabilities, but also these modern warfare capabilities, unmanned systems that exist in different levels, in different domains, and they are able to solve the traditional tasks in a new way.
I think this was a very fabulous answer, and I would like to reiterate to our audience as well, because a lot of people have asked me. So, Olena, please feel free to add to whatever I'm going to say. A lot of people have asked me, like, why is Ukraine fighting? I mean, what is the world getting, or what is the Ukraine getting out of it? I mean, first thing is every country has the right to defend itself. First thing, and I think this is a benchmark Ukraine has set for the countries who actually do not have any kind of defense capabilities, especially in maybe Asia, Latin America, or even Africa as well. It's that it's not easy to basically take over a land which do not have a defense capabilities, because these days or in the modern world there are ways to basically move towards an affordable methodologies or utilities or systems which I think are coming out of Ukraine and will be a kind of a benchmark for future warfare. So now I think deep into the future, countries which cannot afford high tech level Western systems, they can possibly take up the learnings from Ukraine. So Ukraine is kind of setting a benchmark for every other nation who are trying to basically either build up their defense capabilities or do not have the defense capabilities but are trying to basically scout it. So this is something that is coming out. So Ukraine is defending itself, but I think it is giving out a lot more knowledge as well to the world, especially for the countries which are like underrated. I mean, we are seeing the kind of situation that might happen in Hong Kong or Taiwan in the coming years. So such small countries, we do not know the kind of capabilities that might exist, and I think beasts or the giant nations like Russia and China, uh, giving a tough to them, it's not a basically joke. So I think we all should basically applaud the kind of defense system and the capabilities that Ukraine has developed in the past years since 2022 when the war has started. So this is the kind of contribution that I think Ukraine is doing, apart from defending itself. Is that's the, I'd say, contribution that it's going out into the world as well. I feel because of the mainstream media narrative, this kind of things are always overshadowed. But I think because of the experts like Olena, these things are now coming out. It's very important to let people know that when someone is just defending themselves from big nations or the big superpowers, it's not only about creating a defense, but it also that they are somewhere trying to basically give out a lesson. So I think Ukraine, as I said, setting a new benchmark completely into the modern warfare system. And I think uh, I always get this question because I'm originally from India. China is our neighbor, which is again a huge power, and I think a very friendly nation of Russia again. We always get this kind of notion or a kind of comment that China can easily basically knock out India. But Olena, these days the narrative is going on that a country like Ukraine, which had a very minimal defense capabilities back before it started, it's giving so much tough to Russia that it has actually somewhere I think it has negatively impacted Russian forces a lot of times. And if a country like Ukraine, which has started building up now, it is at a on par on the defense capabilities than what it was previously, then you cannot expect a country like basically India kneeling down before China. So I think Ukraine has set that level of benchmark that people are using that Ukraine as an example to let people know that okay, you cannot basically take over us. That's the thing. So I mean, this is the kind of I think learnings and the benchmark and the moral or the ethos that is getting set up through this war. So yeah, Olena, feel free to add, like if you'd like to add any point onto
I
this.
I cannot definitely cannot ignore your comment about why Ukraine is fighting,
Yeah,
because it's that's very simple. If Ukraine won't fight, it won't survive, and
yeah,
the this fight with Russia has been ongoing for centuries. I know that not everybody knows about the history of Russia and Ukraine, and Russia does a lot of disinformation efforts in the whole world, in different regions of the world, trying to prove that it
yeah,
was actually NATO states, the United States, that started that kind of pushed Russia to invade. That is not true, because we have so many episodes with Russia when Russia was just uh, conducting genocide, organizing genocide against Ukrainians, but also other nations in the former Soviet Union, because of their identity, because of their culture, because they had to adopt Russian culture, which was dominant, which was considered the superior culture. So it's about the survival of a nation, and survival of us as an independent society, and a society with different values, that society that doesn't want to be part of Russia. It's, I think, very easy to understand when somebody comes to your home and says, or it's my home now. You do not give it up. That's how it works, you know. I am lucky that nobody asks me that question because I would get really probably passionate and angry. It's a basic thing to do. But also, in addition to what you said about what lessons Ukraine shows the world, it's not just about the defense, it's also about the offense, that Ukraine can damage a very large, very technologically capable adversary, which is Russia. It's a nuclear state that everybody is afraid of. Other nuclear states are afraid of it. We will talk probably more about it in our conversation. There are red lines, there are talks about escalation, that if we do this, we might provoke Russia to attack us. No, you should really stand your ground. You should defend yourself, and that's what Ukraine is doing. And as you mentioned, it managed to inflict significant damage. Not, I mentioned Operation Spiderweb. It's not the only one thing. In August, in September 2025, we saw a series of very successful long-range strikes that Ukraine conducted against Russia's energy infrastructure, because that's the money that is feeding the military industrial complex. The money from oil, the money from gas, all of that Ukraine identified as a legitimate target, because it will finally undermine Russia's ability to sustain its war efforts. So those long-range strikes with indigenously produced deep strike or long-range drones. Again, we are talking about drones. So not missiles, not ballistic missiles, not cruise missiles, but drones. They were able to inflict very significant damage. Russia has a gasoline shortage in almost all regions. So Russia imposed a ban on the export of gasoline. So actually, the effects of this long range campaign are very much noticeable in Russia, and that's what Ukraine gonna continue doing in 2026.
Absolutely, I agree with you on this for sure. And looking at, I would say, the open arms export. So, what does Ukraine's 2025, I would say, decision to open arms export mean for its defense industry and partners? And what are the implications of this move? I think I briefly covered on this fact regarding the lessons that is learned and the kind of inspiration that the Ukraine is giving out to the world. So I think, yeah, please proceed to cover this as well in this part.
Yeah. Well, that's a very, I think, debatable issue that was very discussed and still is being discussed in Ukraine society between the manufacturers and the public policy officials, whether to open arms export or not. Why? Because, first of all, Ukraine needs more money. Ukraine needs more financial resources to produce its systems. And when your only consumer, your only buyer is the Ukrainian state, it's really hard for many manufacturers to scale. So that's a point in favor of arms export opening. But from the other side, there are a lot of fears that those technologies that Ukraine will be exporting, they will somehow end up in Russia, China, and then Ukraine will have to face its own drones flying from Russia, right, used by Russia against Ukraine. So that's actually definitely very valid point. And that's why Ukraine finally, we heard from President Zelensky, the decision to launch controlled export. It will be launched in 2026 and will involve a very narrow, let's say, category of weapon systems, naval drones, for example, artillery systems, and anti-tank systems for now. Maybe more categories will be added later, but it will be started with that. And Ukraine will do the export only to proven partners, to those that have signed security cooperation agreements with Ukraine. It's most of European countries, also North American countries, Canada, for example. Also, Ukraine will be very, very, very careful and definitely will be very selective regarding the contracts, regarding the countries. So it doesn't; these technologies do not really leak outside and somehow end up in Russia. For Ukraine, it brings definitely some additional financial resources because we just heard from President Zelensky that if Ukraine doesn't receive additional financial help from Europe, from, well, United States is not participating in that anymore. So now Europe, maybe Canada, Japan, Australia, other partners. So if Ukraine don't receive additional help, it will be very hard to maintain the production of unmanned systems at the same level. And then we saw that the European Union already just allocated some additional money. But the financial issue is a very serious constraint for Ukraine. And that's why Ukraine is not able to scale the production of many of its systems. For example, in Russia, when wherever you go, wherever, whatever system you take, it can be a small FPV drone, it can be Shahed. Russia is able to scale significantly. Russia is able to use them in huge numbers in any weather. When Ukrainian soldiers on a battlefield are really making this day-to-day decisions, let me, for example, today I can use Mavic drone, tomorrow I cannot because of weather conditions, because there is fog or something is wrong. Russians are using them every day in big numbers. They don't care whether they're going to lose it or not. And that's Russia's advantage. And Ukraine is not able to reach that level just because of financial constraints. So for Ukraine, the opening of export allows more financial support. But also for Ukrainian allies, definitely it's a chance to learn from Ukraine's warfare experience, from Ukraine's direct lessons from the battlefield, and bring those technologies to their militaries. We hope that their militaries will know what to do with those technologies, because it's not just about having those systems, but also to have people trained, able to operate those systems, and generally, the ability of somehow integrate them into the doctrine, into military operations in different countries and different regions of the world is something else that need to be looked at. But yes, that's definitely one extra chance for partners to learn from Ukraine.
Yes, I believe we have covered most of the most initial part of the conversation, which sets the stage for a much more deeper conversation. So, I'd like to mention to that audience that we are ending the part one of the episode over here. And I encourage you to first listen to the part one of the episode fully and then only go to the part two of the episode, because the part two of the episode will be much more deeper and you'll be able to connect with it very well once you listen to the part one. So till then, thank you very much and stay tuned. We'll be back with the much more interesting content in the part two of the episode.